Most people in the entrepreneurial community know Chip Conley as the founder of Joie de Vivre Hotels, a fantastic entrepreneur and marketer who built Joie de Vivre into the second largest operator of boutique hotels in the country. He's also a thought leader with a number of best-selling books under his belt and a widely popular TED Talk. But I don't want to talk about any of that. What I want to talk about is the incredible turn that Chip's life took after Joie de Vivre was sold, after the TED Talk, and after all that happened. And he was wrestling with a question that all of us will have to wrestle with sooner or later if we're lucky. Okay? Chip, it's delightful to have you here.
Thank you. It's an honor, and I never made it to the Inc. 5000 list, and I should have. So this is my honorary degree.
Oh, well, I am sure that most of the entrepreneurs on this call think of you as one of them. You are, after all, a founder of the First Order, a guy who built the Joie de Vivre hotels into the second largest operator of boutique hotels in the country. They also know you as a thought leader with a number of best-selling books under your belt and a widely popular TED Talk. But I don't want to talk about any of that. At least not yet. I want to start after all that is over. After you've sold Joie de Vivre, after the TED Talk and everything, when your life took a real different turn. As you were wrestling with questions that are soon to be, if they're not already, of intense interest to everybody on this call, if they're lucky. And it all started when you had a meeting with Brian Chesky, one of the co-founders of Airbnb, a guy who was young enough to be your son.
Yeah.
What is it that Brian wanted from you?
So Brian asked me if I would help him democratize hospitality. Only that. He said, the hotels have got a monopoly on lodging, and we've started this little tech company that's growing quickly, and we're based just 10 blocks from your home. Would you like to join us as the head of global hospitality and strategy, but also as my in-house mentor? And he said, I'll come over to your house, I'll Uber over to your house, and we can talk about it further. And this was early 2013, and I lived in San Francisco, and in early 2013, I didn't even know what Uber was. So, so I said, you're gonna do what? He says, I'm gonna come over to your house. I'm gonna Uber over to your house. I said, okay. And he did, and then I joined in early 2013. And it was a fascinating journey because my boss was 21 years younger than me, but I was also his mentor.
How did you feel about that?
Well, let's first of all say that 40% of us in the workplace today have a boss that's younger than us. And if you're 55, and I was 52 at that time, turning 60 soon, at that time, 55, you're 70% likely to have a boss younger than you. And by the year 2025, the majority of Americans will have a boss younger than them. So I respected Brian a lot, and I was very curious. But I had to get over some of my own identity issues. I had been CEO of my own company for 24 years. I was used to being the sage on the stage, and now I was going to be the guide on the side, helping the three founders, but especially Brian. And I had to right-size my ego. So I had to do a lot. I also had to jettison some of my historical knowledge because a lot of what I knew about the hotel business wasn't very relevant to Airbnb. So probably more than anything, I just needed to be curious.
So what'd you find there? What were the people like? What was the culture like?
Well, very quickly, I realized I didn't understand the lingo. Some of it was the millennial lingo, but most of it was the tech lingo because I was 52 in a place where the average age was 26. And I just didn't understand the tech business very well. So I made lots of notes, and I did my best to listen. One of the things, part of the reason OK Boomer as a phenomenon came along is because the guy that sort of was famous in the video about the old white guy saying, this is the way the world works. If you're sort of saying this is the way the world works, but you don't really know how it works today, you're saying this is the way the world worked. I had to be open to saying this is now the way the world works, and it's different than what I'm used to, so I better learn a lot. So I had to be humble, and I actually think that was one of the greatest qualities, and part of the reason why they started calling me the modern elder at Airbnb was because they felt I was wise for sure, but I was as curious as I am wise. And there's a lot of boomers who aren't as curious as they are wise. And I think it's that combination, curiosity opens up possibility, and wisdom distills down what's important. And I think that's part of the reason I was well regarded there. And I had more than 100 mentees in the company
100 mentees?
over the past 8 years. Over the past 8 years, yes.
Wow. What did they want to know from you?
Well, sometimes it was quite functional. Sometimes they wanted to just know about the hospitality industry. How do hotels price their product, their guest rooms? Um, and sometimes it was much more leadership driven. So one of the things I used to say during my time at Airbnb was it was an EQ for DQ alliance. I gave them EQ, emotional intelligence, and they gave me DQ, digital intelligence, and we were both better off for it. So most of the time it was a mutual mentorship, but a lot of it was around leadership and around understanding people and to some degree how to create a business that's going to make money, which Airbnb has done. Um, that's a historical has done, and as of the third quarter of this year, did do, which is shocking considering the COVID times we're living in. So a lot of it was just really learning what does it mean to be a hardened, seasoned entrepreneur, even though I was not in my natural habitat. I call this same seed, me, different soil, Airbnb.
They called you a modern elder, which is a phrase that described you perfectly in that role, and it also unlocked a mission for you and led you to where you are now. Tell us what a modern elder is and what a modern elder does.
Well, I think the first modern elder was a guy named Peter Drucker, who I'm sure you know about, management theorist extraordinaire, who was a curious soul. He wrote 2/3 of his 40 books after the age of 65. He's the one who coined the term knowledge worker, which I think now needs to be replaced with wisdom worker. But he was particularly well appreciated because he was always seeking something new and learning something new. Walt Disney was the same way. A lot of people late into their life continue to be curious and avid learners. So at the end of my 4 years at Airbnb, I went to a strategic advisor role from being full-time. And I decided to write my 5th book, which is called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. While I was writing that down here in Baja, southern Baja, an hour north of Cabo San Lucas, where I have a home on the beach, I went for a run on the beach one day. I know you like running, Eric, and it's nice to run around here. So I went for a run on the beach, and I came back with an epiphany. And the epiphany was this: why don't we learn how to mint modern elders? Why don't we create a world where we shift people's mindset about their aging and help them become modern elders, not just in the workplace, but in the rest of life? And so I created the world's first midlife wisdom school, called it the Modern Elder Academy, or for short, MEA. And it launched in January of 2018, and we've had 750 alums from 24 countries come here to Mexico to go through the program.
Who are they?
Who are they? Well, it's what's been fascinating, Eric, what I didn't expect was I thought it'd be all people like 45 to 65, sort of in the middle of their adult life to later adult life. No, we've had people from 30 to 88. Lots of people in their 30s have come, partly because people are feeling irrelevant and bewildered at earlier ages, depending upon their industry. And so it's been everybody from entrepreneurs who've sold their companies to social workers and nurses who have been doing the same thing for 30 years and want to do something new, to unemployed investment bankers and unemployed union carpenters. So it's a pretty diverse group of people that we try to attract. And what they come for is this sense of how to repurpose themselves. If you do the math, so I turned 60 later this month. But when I first did this math exercise, I was 57. And I went on to an online longevity site, and it said I was going to live till 98 based upon the inputs I gave it. So I looked at a little calculator and I said, wait a minute, if I'm 57 and I'm going to live till 98, I have 41 years of adulthood ahead of me, and I have 39 years of adulthood behind me at age 57, because you start counting at age 18 when you turn an adult. So in essence, at age 57, I was not even halfway through my adult life. When you do that kind of math, you start to realize how much of a long life we're going to have, and which led us to creating something called long life learning. And we've just written a white paper called The Emergence of Long Life Learning that's been endorsed by Stanford and Harvard and Notre Dame and a bunch of other schools, because they can see that this is different than lifelong learning, because lifelong learning you can do at any age, 20 years old, 30 years old, 60 years old. But long life learning speaks to your life stages in midlife and beyond. And what are you going to do? What's your legacy? So it's been a thrilling experience. I never thought I would be CEO and founder of an academic institution, but I'm enjoying it.
That's fantastic. That's really, really groundbreaking. We'll come back to it, Chip, but let's talk about the first company that you were CEO of, which is a fast-growing company like a lot of the Inc. 5000 companies that are the heroes of this conference. What was the opening that you saw in the hospitality industry, in the hotel industry, that led you to start Joie de Vivre?
So let me take you back to the mid-1980s. The mid-1980s, the global hotel chains dominated. Their whole premise, the Marriotts and Hiltons of the world, was what people want is predictability. That's really what they want. And so the hotel, the Marriott in Denver, looked just like the one in Detroit. What Bill Kimpton and Ian Schrager were the two pioneers who started the boutique hotel movement in the United States. And I started about 2 or 3 years later. And what led me to this is I was a 26-year-old. I'd gone to Stanford, undergrad, Stanford Business School. And about 2 years out of business school, I just was noticing I had people sleeping on my couch in San Francisco all the time. And I would ask them, why is it that you're staying with me? Why don't you stay in a hotel? And they said, hotels in San Francisco are either poor, or expensive, or boring. And there's nothing that's sort of shabby chic fun. And that's when I decided I would become a boutique hotelier. I quit my job and called the company Joie de Vivre, which means joy of life in French. And that was the first of 52 boutique hotels we created, all in California, until I sold the company 24 years later. And it's now a Hyatt brand. So Joie de Vivre is part of the Hyatt collection.
If you had to put your finger on one thing that made Joie de Vivre such a fast-growing success story, what would that be?
Absolutely culture. So as I think Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for lunch or breakfast, or maybe every meal. Especially in a service industry, you create a culture where people feel joy. Our name even speaks to that culture. And you create a virtuous circle. So you create a great culture, leads to enthusiastic employees. We were voted the second most best place to work in the Bay Area after Google, which is not easy in the tech infested Bay Area to have a little hotel company with 3,500 employees become the number 2 in the year 2008. So that was part of it. Is if you create a great culture, it leads to enthusiastic employees, which leads to more loyal customers, which leads to market share growth, which ultimately leads to profitability and a sustainable profitability. And then you can invest that profits back in culture. So I think of it as a virtuous circle. John Mackey at Whole Foods Markets is a big fan of my book, Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow. He used it there at Whole Foods Markets, and so has Tony Hsieh at Zappos and a few others.
You have come by your wisdom by building a great company, the entrepreneurial way. You've also come by your wisdom the hard way. You took some hard knocks from life in the year 2008 that led to some of your best writing and some incredible insights. What happened that year?
Gosh, what didn't happen that year? For one, I had written that book, Peak, a year earlier and fell in love with the writing of that book. That was my third book. It was my first of my 3 books, of my 5 books that I've written that became a big time seller and had a huge audience for it. And I liked going out and giving speeches about it. I really enjoyed being in the world of being a thought leader. And at that point, I'd been running my company for 22 years, and I was a little bored with it, or just, I don't know. I needed something new. And then the Great Recession came along. And we, in the hospitality business and the travel business, we see recessions faster than most people because people cut back on their travel spending faster, their spas, their restaurants, etc. And we had all kinds of, travel, those kinds of travel businesses, hotels, spas, and restaurants. Long story short is that happened. Then one of my best friends committed suicide. He has the same name I have. His name's Chip. That was hard. I had a long-term relationship that was nearing its end. I had a foster son who was potentially going to prison. So all of that was hitting me at the same time, and I wasn't sure I really wanted to do it anymore. And I really had my own personal sort of dark night of the soul, which entrepreneurs can have, especially if you're a founder of a company. You've run it at that point for 22 years. The company I was like the Richard Branson of this company in the sense that I was the brand. And I realized I wanted to run away from it all, but I couldn't. And then I had a flatline experience. I was giving a speech in St. Louis. I had broken my ankle playing baseball at a bachelor party. I had a bacterial infection in my leg. I was on a strong antibiotic, and I had an allergic reaction to the antibiotic right after I gave a speech on stage. And so I went flatline. I actually went unconscious for a few minutes, and then when the paramedics showed up, thank God they were there, I went flatline. And so, yeah. And that's when I realized maybe it's time to sell this company and and change my life. It was funny because, not funny, but it was just ironic. I was 47 years old at the time, and there's some new studies that have come out about the U-curve of happiness. And it shows that basically the lowest point of happiness on average, now your mileage may vary, but the lowest point of happiness is at age 47.2. And I was not 47.2, I was about 47.7 when I had my flatline experience, but I was pretty close. And that was really the bottom. And then I, over the next 2 years, figured out how at the bottom of a recession, I could sell a company that was in an industry that frankly nobody wanted anything to do with, and how I could basically shift my life. And how I could actually also get rid of the identity, take off this identity I was wearing, which was, I'm the founder and CEO of Joie de Vivre. I have all these hotels, I write books. And I really wanted to sort of say, what's behind that? And if you're an entrepreneur, you sort of know what I'm talking about, especially if you're at a stage in your entrepreneurship where you're feeling like, gosh, this doesn't feel like it used to feel. It used to feel so good. I started this company for creativity and freedom, and I don't feel much of that anymore. So it was quite a relief 2 years later when I did sell. A lot of people were surprised by it, but they hadn't had 2 years mentally to prepare for it like I had.
That sale and that transition in your life, that decision you made, led you to Airbnb and to Modern Elder Academy. So let's go back there. One of the things that you took away from your work at Airbnb was the observation that leadership teams are stronger when they are diverse across generations.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, there's a lot of evidence that diverse leadership teams are often more successful, that of all kinds of diversity. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But why is age diversity even more likely to create success? Part of it's been studied in Germany, because Germany actually has a much older population than we do. So they have been studying the idea of age diversity on teams for a lot longer than the US has. What they were able to find was that if you put together a collection of young people on a team and they're working together, they work very quickly, they make decisions quickly, and they make a lot of mistakes. If you put together a group of older people on a team, they take longer to make decisions, they make less mistakes. You put them together, and what you get is the best of both worlds. Now, you could also get the worst of both worlds depending upon the nature of how the merger of those ages happens. But the reason it could be the best of both worlds is because when you're younger, your brain is, and I'm talking about sort of the technologies and the science of the brain now. your brain tends to be very focused. And that means if you're a brilliant technologist, you're really good at looking at something and solving that thing. As you get older, what you end up doing is you become better at holistic and systemic thinking. And that means you can connect the dots more. And that means you can actually, beyond the focus, that young person who's focusing, you can see the collateral benefits and costs of the decision you're about to make. So if you were, as Brian and I found together, Brian once said, Brian Chesky, co-founder and CEO of Airbnb, said, we have, our synapses fire together, Chip, but they actually come up with different kinds of observations. Brian was exceptional at looking at the minutia and looking at being quite focused. But he wasn't looking at what the implications were of the decision that was going to be made 3 months from now or 3 years from now if we go that path. Now, I'm not saying he didn't do that. He's a spectacular CEO. I would never have joined the company and worked for him if I didn't have a ton of respect for him and belief in him. But back when I started, Brian willingly admitted that he was the skipper of a ship that was making people seasick. And what I mean by that is that he was constantly changing decisions, and there were 30 priorities in 2013, early in 2013 when I joined. There were 30 strategic initiatives for the company. Nobody, including Brian, could actually list them all. So one of the first things I did was say, hey, let's do an offsite with our executive team. Let's take the team to New York, because New York was a market that we were dealing with a lot of issues in terms of regulatory-wise. And we did a 3-day workshop focused on my book, Peak, because part of the reason that the guys the co-founders reached out to me is because they liked that book, Peak. And so we used the book as a framework to say, how can we reduce the number of initiatives to 4 for 2014? And so we did. And so in 2014, we went from 30 strategic initiatives to 4, and then we got exceptionally focused. So in some ways, what I'm saying is the exact opposite of what I said a moment ago, is that the older people have a broad perspective, younger people are focused. But when it comes to being a young entrepreneur, sometimes you think you don't know what your limits are for yourself or your company until you surpass them. And so what I was helping Brian see by doing this was, how do we up the quality of what we are going to do? Because Steve Jobs famously said that the most important decisions that a leader makes is the things you say no to. And so we needed to learn how to say no to more things and say a wholeheartedly yes to how do we invest in the 4 key strategic initiatives. And so I'm proud of that. I do think that it's part of the reason why Brian wanted me to be the head of the strategy for a tech company, having never worked in a tech company before. So that was, but I learned a lot.
Let's talk about leadership. You're the entrepreneur, founder, CEO of a company that has both of those brains working for you, the older, broader thinking brain and the more focused, younger brain. How do you manage them differently? How do you make sure that those older workers you have are doing their best work, and how do you answer that question for the younger workers as well?
Well, I think I've said for a long time, argue as if you're right, listen as if you're wrong. And so I believe that healthy debate and intellectual jousting is part of what it means to be a leader. And frankly, it's what it means to have a great leadership team. If you have a team where there's groupthink or people feel like they can't challenge the leader in terms of the thinking, then that's a problem. But the key is to be able to listen and have the humility and the desire to learn enough so that you can imagine new ideas that didn't come from your brain. And so whether that was older workers listening a little more intently or older leaders listening more intently to a young person who's got a dream and a vision that may sound crazy at first. There's a lot of venture capitalists who did not fund Brian and his co-founders. And there are a lot of ideas in many companies that actually die on the vine because a young person has a beautiful idea but has not articulated it in a way where the older management team is getting it. Similarly, the younger people, what I tried to help them see is you have a mentor in the making here. 75% of millennials have said they would like to have a mentor, and yet only 2% actually have a formal mentor. So there are lots of opportunities for us to create a mutual mentorship between someone in the company who's older than you, who may have some knowledge that you want, and some of what you could teach that person. So I would just say that my experience really bore truth to the idea that with 5 generations in the workplace for the first time, it really should be an intergenerational potluck, where each of us and each generation brings to the table what we know and can do best.
You spoke just now about having a culture in which you could ask questions, where people are open to information that comes from a brain not like yours. How do you create that kind of questioning culture?
Well, first of all, you have to be open to making mistakes and not trying to be the know-it-all. One of the things that a person once said to me after a meeting when I asked a lot of questions, they said, you know what, you're not the smartest person in the room, but you might be the wisest, and you're definitely the most curious. And so that curiosity again comes up, and it's this idea that if you're not curious, and if don't have an inquiring mind, what you have today is what you will have 10 years from now, because you won't have any space left to add to what you know. So I think the key on this for me was creating a culture where people feel that they can ask questions that might actually open up blind spots. I call these catalytically curious questions, and there's a line of thinking around this kind of questions called Appreciative Inquiry, if you want to Google it, Appreciative Inquiry. And it's a way to open up possibilities by just asking really interesting questions. I also think that what was fascinating, and what I think most companies need to consider, is how are you creating a company based upon a growth mindset? So when I joined Brian, one of the things I first talked with him about was Carol Dweck from Stanford, her theory about mindset. You can have a growth or a fixed mindset. If you have a fixed mindset, you have a tendency to want to prove yourself, and you define success as winning. But if you have a growth mindset, and that sounds fun. I mean, we all want to win for sure. But if you take that kind of mentality of you only play games you can win, guess what? Your sandbox gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So the opposite of a fixed mindset is a growth mindset. If you have a growth mindset, your tendency is to focus not on proving yourself, but improving yourself. And you define winning, your success as not winning, but learning. And that is really how we built Airbnb. It was already a learning organization, no doubt about it. And if I had never gone there, I'm sure they would have, done just fine. But I think what I helped them to see, and what I helped Brian to give language to, is the idea we wanted to be a company based upon a growth mindset, which means you create an organization where people are constantly improving, which means they can fail, which means they can look like an idiot. In fact, that whole mindset is what the modern Elder Academy is based upon. The idea that you're maybe in midlife, but you could learn how to surf. You could learn how to do improv. You could learn how to write a poem. You could learn how to be a mentor to someone 21 years younger than you who's going to be your boss. So what we have to do as humans is to think of the possibility that we are going to be constantly improving. And if we are willing to do that, we're willing to try new things at ages in our life that maybe our parents would never have tried.
I want to probe a little bit about that phrase you used a few minutes ago, appreciative inquiry. Is that the right phrase?
Yes.
It's sparked by catalytically curious questions. What are the sort of characteristics of a catalytically curious question?
So a catalytically curious question is a question that invites a bigger conversation and maybe opens up possibilities of things that the person hasn't seen. So what's an example of that? So first of all, what's an example of not a not appreciative inquiry question? It's yes, no answers. So it's a question that says, I would like to know this. It's accusatory kind of things. It's anything that would shut someone down from feeling comfortable to talk about it. So, the opposite of that would be you ask a question with empathy. You ask a question that helps a person move from their head to their heart in terms of trying to make a decision. So what's a good example of that? The classic one that coaches ask is, what does your heart tell you? I find that a little too new age, personally. I think what I actually prefer is a question that helps a person imagine the vision. So when someone's struggling with something, I say, when this works, let's see how we can get this fixed. When this works and is operating at its perfect effectiveness, what does that look like? Tell me, just give me the vision of it. Talk to me about that. And how long in the future is that? Is that 2 months from now? Is that 2 days from now? Is it 2 years from now? Depending upon what the scope is that we're talking about. Because sometimes actually helping a person talk through what they want this to ultimately be is helping them get clear on, what are we trying to solve here? What does this look like in its full form? Which, when someone's frustrated with something, is a nice way to bring people back to their mission and purpose of why they're doing it. So there's all kinds of ways you can ask questions that way. But let me just say, when you're a great leader, you lead with questions. If you're leading with answers, if the organization requires you to be the answer giver of everything, you have not built a sustainable organization. You've built an organization where you are the center of the universe, and I know what that was like. I did that at Joie de Vivre, for sure, until my last 5 years there, probably. But I think that the reality is, when you build an organization where all the answers are coming from you, you have either undervalued what people have to offer, or you have underperformed in your recruiting process to hire people who can actually do even better than you can. And so I actually think this is a really important part of leadership, is how do you create leadership teams that perform what in crew they call swing. When you have 8 people rowing together and a coxswain, making sure everybody's in unison, an amazing thing happens. The boat starts to lift out of the water as people are rowing. And that means that there's less friction, so that the boat goes faster. Well, a great team operates that way. And a great leader is that coxswain and helping everybody sort of elevate their game. But that doesn't mean there's not conflict. I'm a big fan of Pat Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of Teams, which basically says at the core of it, like, there's going to be conflict, healthy conflict, and then you're going to align.
One of the questions that you asked at Airbnb is a question that was popularized by Peter Drucker. Very elementary question, but profound. What business are we in? When you asked that question at Airbnb, what was the answer? What was the right answer?
Well, here's the exercise we do. As you can tell, I'm a big Peter Drucker fan. And I think that's a fascinating question, probably the most important question a leader can ask themselves, or an organization can ask themselves. So the way we do this exercise, and we did it originally at Joie de Vivre, and then I brought it to Airbnb, is let's say you have 12 people on your leadership team. You get 6 groups of dyads, 6 duos, and make sure they're far enough apart from each other so that they can't hear each other. And let's say I was doing this with you, Eric. I would say, what business are we in, Eric? And then you would give an answer, and I would say, thank you. And then I would say to you again, what business are we in, Eric? And you can't answer the same way twice. And we do that exercise 5 times. So it's a repeating question 5 times. Each time you give a different answer. And then we switch and we do the opposite. So we did this at Airbnb a month after I joined. And we came to the conclusion we were in the belong anywhere business. And you've gotten it right when you've come up with an idea that your competitors could not match. Marriott is not in the belong anywhere business. Expedia or Booking.com is not in the belong anywhere business. So the thing we had to then vet is there a large business to be created here around belonging anywhere? And as it turns out, there was.
Yeah, there certainly was. This is the Vision Conference, so I'm going to ask you for a vision. You have noted at Modern Elder Academy that there are kind of divergent demographic trends. The population is getting older, and yet power is shifting younger. What does that mean for the future of the workforce?
Well, you better get used to the idea that they're going to be 75-year-old hotel front desk clerks checking you in, and you're going to have a 25-year-old CEO running a company. And I think we already see this. I actually think where it's going to be interesting, and this is where I find the vision piece very curious, is how do we create schools, prep schools for elders, for elderhood. Elder and being elder doesn't mean you're elderly. That's maybe the last 5 or 10 years of your life. But I was clearly an elder at 52 in a company surrounded by 26-year-olds. So how are we helping people in midlife to remake themselves? And how are we doing that in tandem with higher education? Listen, Clay Christensen, the famous disruptive innovation author, said 3 years ago before he passed away that higher education, colleges and universities in the United States, half of them will be out of business in 10 years. And that was before COVID. So what I'm really interested about now, and why I wrote a white paper called The Emergence of Long Life Learning, is how do we connect higher education with people in midlife? And how do we create Modern Elder Academy campuses or others like them that allows people to go back to school? And so my vision is not just intergenerational collaboration at a university, but even just programs that are exclusive to people in midlife in a university campus setting. And to me, if we don't do that, we are going to have a situation where there's going to be an obsolescence in the population. And when there's an obsolescence in the population and they're living longer, you create distress because if you're going to live 10 or 20 years longer than your parents, but you can't afford it financially, that is a problem. And this is a problem that is only starting to become evident to policymakers in the US.
In your book, Wisdom at Work, you identify a lot of different definitions of wisdom that other people have come up with. What's your definition of wisdom?
It will change from day to day. As of today, it would be pattern recognition based upon insightful experiences. So it's recognizing the pattern and saying, I've seen this before. I know how this movie ends. And that's why wisdom is not necessarily directly correlated with age, because it's all about cultivating that wisdom. But it means that if you've been on the planet a little bit longer, you have seen more patterns to recognize, more experiences to recognize that actually can give you some insight that you wouldn't have had 20 years earlier.
One question that I ask entrepreneurs who are as successful as you is, and I'm always fascinated by the response, is that entrepreneurship is a difficult path to take. And there's a lot of heartbreak and a lot of failure along the way, and most people never achieve the heights that you've achieved. Why do you think it worked out for you?
I would say it's a combination of being driven. I am a pretty driven person, but that alone won't do it. I think it's the combination of being driven, being open to creating a team that feels a solidarity around the purpose that we're actually trying to attain. And so that purpose-driven, purpose, wakes you up in the morning. But if it's only your individual purpose, then it's a great wake-up call for you, but maybe not for your team. So creating a team that believes in the purpose, lives it and breathes it, and you as the senior leader, the CEO, the founder, whatever role you have, you empower them. So I'm a big believer in servant leadership. So the most important question I think any leader can ever ask their direct reports is, how can I support you to do the best work of your life here at Airbnb, for example?
That's fantastic, Chip. That is a great place to leave it with the most important question a leader can ask his or her team.
Perfect.
Thanks so much for being part of this conference.
Look forward to seeing you in Baja.
Soon.
Yes.